The crash against Nora Voss's front door came at the exact hour when even the dogs in Kale's Ridge had gone quiet. It was the kind of deep, complete silence that only settles over a small mountain village long past midnight, the kind where sound feels louder than it should, and what struck the door was not quiet at all. It was heavy and sudden, landing against the wood like something that had spent the last of everything it had simply reaching this spot. She was at her work table with a needle in her right hand and a length of cream-colored wool across her lap, working a hem by lamplight, the way she always did when the rest of the village had gone to sleep. She was 24 years old. She had lived in this house her whole life, first with her mother, Ida, and for the past 3 years, alone. The house sat at the far edge of Kale's Ridge, where the village path ran out and gave way to the open slope of the mountain. Most people considered this location impractical. Nora had always thought it was fine. She liked being at the edge. The window faced up instead of across, and there was something in that she had always preferred. She set the needle down. Old May, who had been training her as a healer's apprentice for 2 years, had a saying she returned to so often it had become something close to reflex in Nora's mind. Panic is just fear wearing a costume. Take the costume off, and what you are left with is the situation itself, which is always more manageable than fear makes it appear. Nora reached for this thought now without deciding to. The way you find a railing in the dark without needing to look for it. She took the iron poker from beside the hearth. She went to the door. She opened it. The man on her front step was not lying in the way of someone who had simply fallen. He was on his side with both arms pressed beneath him, palms against the cold stone, still pushing himself upward. Everything about him was still working towards standing. The locked jaw, the tight, determined pull of his shoulders, the shallow, strained rhythm of his breathing. He was failing the attempt. He had probably been failing it for a while before she heard him. But he had not stopped trying, and that was the first thing she understood about this man. He did not let go easily. She stepped forward and pressed 2 fingers to the side of his throat. His pulse came back immediately, too fast, not as strong as it should be. With an unevenness, she filed away to address. But present, continuous. "All right," she said quietly. It was a decision, not a comfort. She put the poker against the wall and assessed the situation with the practical speed that was perhaps her most useful natural quality. He was large, built the way a life of hard physical work builds a person, broad across the shoulders and several inches taller than her. She was alone. The doorway was open, and cold was coming in. Getting him inside was the first priority, and the fact that moving an unconscious man twice her weight by herself was genuinely difficult was a problem she would solve by solving it, rather than by thinking about whether she could. She got his arm over her shoulder. She braced against the step. She stood. It took 4 attempts. She scraped her knee on the threshold on the second try, which she noted and ignored. On the 4th attempt, she got him through the doorway, across the floor, and down onto the narrow cot she kept folded against the wall near the hearth. Her arms were shaking when she stepped back. She let them shake. The body could have its reactions as long as the hands kept working. She lit the second lamp. In fuller light, the situation became both clearer and more serious. 3 wounds crossed his chest, cutting diagonally from his left shoulder toward his lower right ribs. Not the clean, narrow lines a blade left when it moved fast through flesh. These were torn, ragged at the edges, the damage of something that had ripped rather than cut, that moved through and left everything shredded in its wake. 2 of the wounds were bleeding steadily. The third, closest to his shoulder, had slowed to a dark, thick seep. That slowing was either the body holding pressure or the beginning of something she did not want to think about yet. She filed the question and moved to the supply chest. Old May's training ran through her head like a list she had memorized past the point of needing to consult. Water to the fire, clean cloth torn to exact widths, the sealed tin from the second shelf, the one with the curved needle and fine thread inside, kept dry and ready for moments like this. The brown glass jar of wound wash, May's own formula, the bundle of dried feverwort, because when she pressed the back of her hand to his forehead and pulled it away, the heat she felt told her the fever had already established itself well beyond its first stages. She cut away what remained of his shirt with the small scissors from the work table. May had been clear on one point above most others. Hurrying was not efficiency. Hurrying was a different kind of abandonment, the abandonment of the work standard. Nora moved through the cleaning with the careful, methodical pace that produced clean results, working from the outside of each wound inward, changing the cloth when it absorbed too much, making sure the wash reached every part of every tear. When she arrived at the deepest wound, the one running from his mid-shoulder downward, the one that explained immediately what it had cost him to drag himself this far, she had the curved needle threaded and ready before she let herself think about what she was doing. She had used this needle 3 times in her apprenticeship. Never on anything this serious. She bent over his chest, and she stitched, bringing to it the same even tension and attention she brought to fine fabric. May had said once that there was no justification for stitching flesh worse than cloth, and Nora had never found reason to disagree. She checked his pulse twice while she worked. Both times it came back to her. When all 3 wounds were closed and covered with clean linen, and she had wrapped strips around his chest to hold the dressings in place, she pulled her own blanket from the bed and laid it over him. Then she sat back and looked at him properly for the first time, without a task immediately in her hands. He was in his middle 30s, she estimated. The fever had reddened his skin and tightened his face into lines of strain, but underneath that she could see the structure clearly. It was not a face designed to put people immediately at ease. There was a settled quality to the jaw and brow, something that said this person had made decisions about themselves long ago and lived accordingly. A face that would make more sense in hard conditions, in open country, with something to push against. His hands were old scarred. Silver-white lines across the palms and knuckles, a faded mark along his left forearm, the record of years spent doing work that left evidence. And on his right hand, a ring, heavy silver, set with a dark oval stone, with something carved into it, the lamplight catching the impression of a design, without making it fully clear. The ring had the weight of something that meant something beyond its material. She noted it and left it alone. She pulled her chair close to the cot and settled in. The first hours moved in the way crisis hours move, not fast, not slow, but with an odd flatness, each moment exactly as long as it was, and nothing more. She changed the wound cloths twice when they soaked through. She refreshed the compress each hour, watching the heat in his skin for any sign of shift. She kept the fire consistent at the temperature May had taught her to maintain for fever patients. She talked to him. She had done this with May's overnight patients, when there was nothing more medically available to offer, and the only remaining gift was presence. She talked about the ridge, about the village, about a long overdue order from a woman who had very specific opinions about thread weight. She talked about old May's annual war with the rabbits that got into the herb garden, a conflict May described in military terms that Nora found privately funny. She talked about the frost she had seen on the eastern slope that afternoon, how it turned every blade of grass silver and temporary. He did not hear her, probably. Around the 4th hour before dawn, his breathing changed. Not gradually. It worsened quickly and without warning, a sharp deterioration that had her on her feet before she had consciously decided to move. His whole body stiffened. The heat coming off him increased to something she could feel from 2 feet away. She pressed the compress hard against his forehead and laid her free hand over his, the scarred right hand with the ring, and she talked steadily. She talked about May's rabbits again because that was what was in her head, and the subject did not matter. What mattered was the voice, the unbroken sound of someone choosing to stay present. For 12 minutes, she did not know which way this was going to go. She counted his pulse against the seconds in her head. She worked the compress. She watched the rise and fall of his chest with the kind of focused attention that uses the whole body, and she kept talking about gardens and frost, and the particular sound the ridge made at night, when the wind came down from the east, and she held on. At the end of 12 minutes, the spike began to ease. Not fully, not enough to relax, but enough. His breathing found a rougher version of a rhythm. The rigidity in his shoulders softened by slow degrees. His pulse, when she pressed her fingers to his throat, had found a pattern she could read. She stepped back. She stood still for a long moment, with her eyes on the steady rise and fall of his chest, making certain of what she was seeing. Then she went to the window and put her forehead against the cold glass and breathed. 3 full, deliberate breaths. Not for air, for releasing something that had been held very tight for the past 12 minutes. She turned back. He was breathing. She put more wood on the fire. She went back to the work table, picked up the cream wool and the needle, and she worked on the hem in the lamplight while the rest of the night passed. She had made a decision, somewhere in those 12 minutes, that she did not name out loud. It was simply there. the way a knot sits in thread, small and fixed and not moving. She was going to work toward this without stopping. That was the only form of knowing available to her right now, and it was enough. At some point before the first gray appeared under the shutters, she finished the hem. She set it aside. She looked across the room at the man on the cot, and she allowed herself, quietly and without ceremony, a moment of pure relief. Then she got up to start the water for the next compress. The second day of his time in her house began. She did not go to Old May that morning. She had thought about it, had calculated the 7-minute walk, and what she would say, and what May's greater experience might add. But each time she reached the edge of that decision, she looked at the cot and thought about 7 minutes gone, and what could shift in 7 minutes when a fever was doing this. She stayed. She made broth and kept it warm by the fire, and watched and tended, and told herself she would decide about May when the situation changed in one direction or the other. At mid-morning, Vera, from 2 houses down, knocked on the door. Nora heard her coming on the path and had the door open before the second knock could land. Vera held a small wrapped parcel and a look that said she had been thinking about coming for several hours. "I haven't seen you at the market in 3 days," she said. Her eyes moved, quick and natural, to the space over Nora's shoulder. Nora kept her body in the doorway. "I have a large order. I'm behind on it." "I brought bread," Vera said. She was still looking past Nora. "You've got both lamps lit." "I was reading," Nora said. "Thank you for the bread, Vera. I'll be at the market Thursday. I promise." Vera accepted this with the grace of a woman who had been navigating Nora Voss for 24 years and knew which approaches worked. She handed over the bread and went back down the path with one look over her shoulder that Nora met with a small wave and a closed door. She stood with her back against the door. From the cot, nothing. She turned around. He was still. She unwrapped the bread and set it on the table and went back to work. He murmured something in the early afternoon, not words she could separate from the sound itself, but a rough, involuntary noise that told her the fever had produced the half-waking, half-dreaming state she had seen in May's patients. She stood beside him. His eyes were closed. His hands at his sides had curled slightly at the fingers, the way a person's hands curl when they are holding something in a dream. He said 2 words clearly. They sat up out of the rest of the sound like something surfacing from deep water. "The traitor." Then he was gone back under. She sat with those 2 words for a while, turning them over without arriving at anything she could use. By the 3rd morning he was still alive, and still fevered, and no worse by any measurement she had, which was progress, of a kind even when it did not feel like it. Nora sat in her chair in the dim light before dawn, and looked at him, and allowed herself the thought she had been setting aside for 2 days. He might not survive. The fever had not broken. 3 days was a long time for a fever this severe, on top of wounds this serious. She had done everything she knew how to do, and sometimes that was not enough, and the body had its own calculations that she could not access or override. She sat with that thought. Then she got up, went to the heavy wooden chest at the back of the room, and opened it. Beneath her good fabrics and her tools was a length of linen she kept folded in clean cloth, pale, the color of winter light, set aside for when it was needed. She had not used it since her father, 2 years before her mother. She lifted it out and held the weight of it in both hands. She carried it to the work table. She sat down. She threaded a needle. The decision had been made before she was aware of making it, which was perhaps the most honest way decisions ever came. Her hands already knew what came next. She was simply the person behind them, following where they led. Her mother had taught her this. Ida Voss had said that the burial cloth was not an act of giving up. It was an act of recognition. You were saying, this life is real. This person was here. The way they leave the world should have care in it. To sow carelessly was to say the life did not deserve your best. Nora had never once sewed anything without her best. She began with the border. Silver thread, from the small spool in the tin she kept for fine materials. The pattern was her mother's, and her mother's mother's before that, small moons along the hem, each one stitched so the curve of it caught the light slightly differently from the one beside it. Her mother had explained the meaning simply when Nora was 12. The moon does not stop because it is not full. It goes through its dark phase and comes back. You stitch the moons along the border to say we see you, in your dark time. We are still here. She stitched. On the cot, he breathed. She checked on him every 20 minutes, replaced the compress, examined the wounds, returned to the chair. She moved through it, without having to think about each step, which left her mind free to be somewhere else, while her hands stayed useful. She thought about her mother, who would have done exactly this, and who would have done it without grief, and without resignation, simply as the thing that came after you had done everything else available to you. The black thread came next. A single line through the center seam, running the full length of the linen, straight and deliberate. Her mother had called it the road. Everyone walks a road. You stitch it so they have it with them, so they remember that the walking is not the ending of the thing, but only a part of it. She worked through the afternoon, and into the early dark, and then by lamplight through the evening, the cloth growing under her hands with the slow, certain quality of work being done the right way. Around midnight, she glanced up from the needle in the way she always did on her regular checks. He was looking at her. His eyes were open, and they were not the blank, unseeing eyes of the fever state. There was something behind them, making the effort of focus, even if the effort was difficult. He was watching her hands, watching the cloth in her lap, watching the needle move through the pale linen, and his expression was something she could not name precisely, but it was not alarmed, and it was not confused. It was something more complicated than either of those. "You are awake," she said. She kept her voice quiet. His gaze moved from the cloth to her face, and held there. She could see the effort it cost him. He was not well. He was not out of the dark. But he was present in a way he had not been. "You have had a high fever for 3 days," she said. "Your wounds are stitched and clean. You are in Kale's Ridge, in my house. My name is Nora. You are safe." He looked at her for another moment. Then his eyes closed, and his breathing settled into something she had not heard in 3 days, something slower and more deliberate, something that felt like a body finally deciding to work with her, rather than against her. She picked the needle back up. She kept working. Outside, the ridge was completely quiet, and the night was long, and she stitched the burial cloth for a man whose name she did not know while he breathed across the room, and the silver moons grew along the hem one careful stitch at a time. She worked until almost 4 in the morning, when the cold reached her hands enough to make the stitching imprecise. She set the linen down, folded her arms on the table, laid her head on them, just for a moment, just until the hands warmed. She was asleep before the moment finished. On the cot, Gareth Drake opened his eyes. The lamp was burning low, its amber light barely reaching the work table, where the woman had fallen asleep over her folded arms, dark hair falling forward, one hand still resting near the cloth she had been working on. He lay still and looked at her. He looked at the linen under her hand, the silver border along the edge, the single dark thread he could see running through the center. He had surfaced, and gone under again, enough times over 3 days, that he had a fragmented impression of her, hands working without hesitation, a voice talking steadily about ordinary things in the dark, the particular quality of someone's presence when they are fully committed to a task and do not announce it. He had not expected, when he finally came far enough back to understand what he was seeing, to find her sewing a burial cloth by lamplight. He lay still and looked at the cloth for a long time. His mother had told him something once, when he was young enough to store things before understanding them. She had said, "The person who prepares your burial cloth loves you more honestly than anyone who dances at your wedding. Because the burial cloth is made when there is nothing to gain from it, when the ceremony is over and the easy love has gone home, when the only thing left is the choice to keep caring about a life that may be ending." He had kept that thought for over 30 years without a use for it. He looked at the cloth. He looked at the woman sleeping over her folded arms. Outside, the first gray pushed at the edges of the shuttered window. Inside, the fire burned steady and low, and neither of them moved, and the night held them both in the particular stillness that comes before a morning that changes something. She woke with a start, lifting her head from the table, with the wide, immediate alertness that comes from sleeping lightly in a house where something needs watching. The lamp had burned down to its last thin light. The fire had gone lower than she would have let it. The room was quiet, in the particular way of early morning before full dawn. She looked at the cot. The man on it was sitting up. Not fully, not with ease, but sitting, one hand braced behind him on the cot's edge, the other arm across his chest where the wounds were. He held himself carefully. He was pale, still clearly unwell, but his eyes were open, and they were holding focus in a way they had not managed since she had pulled him through the door. He was watching her. She stood, and her back made known its feelings about a night spent bent over a work table. She moved them aside. "You should lie back down," she said. The practicality in her voice was not something she planned. It was simply what came out when she was tired, and the situation was clear, and there was work to do. "I have been lying down for 3 days," he said. His voice was rough and unused, but it was even. There was nothing uncertain in it, which told her something. "You have had wounds that needed stitching, and a fever that nearly killed you twice," she said. She crossed to the cot and crouched beside him to check the dressings, working through it with the same careful efficiency as the nights before. "You can sit up if you want. You are not going anywhere today." He looked down at her hands where they moved across the bandaging. "You did all of this?" "Yes. Alone. There was no one else here." He was quiet while she checked the last dressing and replaced what needed replacing. "How long has it been?" 3 days and the better part of a fourth." Another silence. She straightened up. He looked at her in the direct, measuring way that had no performance in it, only attention. She went to the basin and came back with a cup of water. She held it out. He took it and drank slowly, with a care that told her he knew the body was not fully reliable yet, and was accounting for it, rather than ignoring it. She watched to make sure he could manage, which he could. "There is broth," she said, "when you are ready." "What is your name?" he asked. "Nora Voss." She turned to the work table and picked up the burial cloth, because she had left it there, and she was aware of it, in a way that felt slightly exposed, now that he was sitting up and looking at things. She set it on the chair rather than folding it away, because folding it away now would make a statement she did not intend. "You said yours last night, or tried to." The fever made it difficult to hear. "What did I say?" I could not make it out clearly. He nodded once. He was looking at the cloth on the chair. She went to the pot and ladled out the broth and brought it back and held it out to him. He took it. He held it. He was still looking at the cloth. Then he reached sideways and touched the silver moon border with one finger. One deliberate, unhurried touch. The touch of a person trying to understand something. "You made this for me," he said. Not a question. She had not thought it would be readable so quickly. She stood with her hands at her sides and looked at him, looking at the cloth, and she gave him the truth, because it was the only thing available that was worth giving. "I thought you were going to die," she said. "I did not know who you were. But you had come a long way to get here, and you had worked very hard to get here, and I did not want you to leave the world without something made with care." He was quiet for a long time. She did not try to fill it. She had worked with Old May long enough to know that silence was its own kind of language, and that the impulse to break it usually came from the speaker's discomfort rather than the listener's need. He looked at the silver moons. He looked at the black thread through the center seam. He looked at all of it with an expression that was too layered to read fully from the outside. Then, in a voice that was quiet, and came from somewhere remembered rather than decided, he said, "My mother told me once that the person who prepares your burial cloth loves you more honestly than anyone who dances at your wedding." The room was very still. Nora stood with her hands at her sides and let the words settle, because there was nothing she could add to them that would not diminish them, and what he needed right now was not conversation. It was soup. "Drink the broth," she said. "It is thin. Your stomach will not manage anything else yet." He drank. She watched to make sure he could manage, which he could, though it cost him more visible effort than it should have. When he was finished, she took the cup. Their hands came close in the exchange and she moved past it. "Gareth," he said. She looked at him. "My name." The same quiet, direct quality. No performance. "Gareth." "All right," she said. "Gareth, you need to rest. If you want to sit up, but do not push further than that. The fever is not fully gone. If you tire yourself before it breaks completely, we go back to the beginning." He looked at her steadily. "You are not going to ask what happened to me. Not today." He was still. "Why not today?" "Because you are not well enough to answer, and I am not certain I would trust the answers," she said. "When you are better, you can tell me what you choose to tell me, and I will make my own decisions about it." He studied her for a moment, with those eyes that were too direct to be comfortable, but were somehow not unkind. "All right," he said. He looked around the room with the careful attention of a person building an accurate picture of where they are. He looked at the work table, at the shelves, at the supply chest. He looked at the way the house was arranged, which told a person things about the person who arranged it, if the person looking knew how to read it. "Who taught you to stitch wounds?" he said. "Old May. She is the village healer. I have been her apprentice for 2 years. And the burial cloth?" "My mother." He absorbed this without comment. "How did you get me inside?" he said. "Alone." "With considerable difficulty," she said. 4 attempts. A scraped knee. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The possibility of one. He shifted on the cot, trying to adjust his position, and she saw immediately that the effort was going to end poorly. She moved before the outcome finished, stepping forward and getting her hands under his arm and against his back, steadying the redistribution of weight before he went sideways. It put her very close to him, close enough that she could feel the residual heat of the fever and hear the quick, careful breath he took when she took some of his weight. "I have you," she said. He got himself settled with her steadying him. When she stepped back, his eyes were on her with an expression she could not entirely name. Something in the territory between gratitude and something else. Something that had not yet found its form. "Thank you," he said. She stepped back further. "Lie down," she said. "You can sit up again later. Lie down now." He lay down with the deliberate care she had come to recognize as his version of doing things the right way, even when doing it the right way was not the way that felt natural to him. She tucked the blanket up, which she did as a practical matter and not a tender one, and she went back to the work table. She listened to his breathing for a few minutes. It evened. He slept. She sat in the chair and put her hands in her lap and looked at the opposite wall and let herself feel, very quietly and without ceremony, the specific texture of the past 3.5 days, the exhaustion, the sustained attention, the small, precise satisfaction of work that had done its job. These feelings were not large. They were all the practical-sized feelings she preferred, the kind that fit inside the space she had for them, without overflow. She looked at the burial cloth on the chair. She thought about picking it up. She left it where it was. She thought, he is going to wake up tomorrow more himself, and then there are going to be things to figure out that I do not have enough information yet to figure out. And the only way to get the information is to wait, which she was good at, and to keep doing the work in the meantime, which she was also good at. She picked up the cream wool and the new curtain lengths she had started cutting, and she went back to work. Outside, the ridge was turning fully to morning, and the second lamp had burned itself out, and the one near the door was still going, throwing its amber light across the floor, and the sleeping man, and the careful, precise movements of a woman who had kept him alive through 4 very long nights, and was already thinking about what came next. She was not going to let herself think about the ring yet. The ring on his right hand, with the dark stone and the carved design, she had caught a better look at that morning, when she changed the dressings, and the angle was right, and the lamplight was good. She was not going to think about it yet. She sewed, and the morning built around her, and the man on the cot slept with the deep, real sleep of a body finally doing the work of healing properly, and something that had been very tight for 4 days began, very slowly, to ease. The fever broke the next morning. Not gradually, the way it had been building and receding in waves for 4 days, fully, cleanly, the way fevers sometimes break after holding too long, suddenly, and without warning, soaking everything in its release, and then simply gone. Nora woke to the sound of him moving, and found him awake with clear eyes, and a face that was still pale, but was no longer carrying the tight, strained look of a person, in the grip of something larger than themselves. She changed the bedding. She made fresh broth. She checked the wounds, which were closed and clean, and healing with the directional progress she had been watching for. She checked his temperature. He was warm, naturally warm, in the way a person simply was, and not in the way a fever made you. She sat back. "You're through it," she said. "Yes," he said. He said it simply, without relief in his voice, as though the body had done what it was going to do, and the outcome was neither surprising nor remarkable. She was beginning to understand that this was how he related to most things. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "May I ask you something?" "Yes." "The cloth." He looked at the shelf above the workbench where she had put it after he had fallen asleep the morning before. Do you make them often? She considered how to answer this. Not often, but I keep the material ready. My mother taught me that you do not wait until you need it to prepare, that the preparation itself is an act of respect. And you thought I warranted it. I thought anyone in your condition warranted it, she said. It had nothing to do with who you were. I did not know who you were. He looked at her. What would you have done, he said, if I had died? Continued, she said. Finished it. Seen to it that you were handled properly. Made sure someone was told. You would have done that for a stranger. Yes. He was quiet for a while after that, looking at the ceiling, with the expression of someone turning something over in their mind that has no surface to grip. My mother was right, he said finally, quietly, more to himself than to her. She did not ask him to explain. She got up and refilled the broth cup and brought it back and sat across from him, and they sat together in the ordinary quiet of the room for a while, neither of them requiring the other to make conversation, which was the kind of silence she had always preferred to most kinds of talking. He ate better today, the broth, and then, at midday, a small amount of the soft bread she had been keeping, and he managed both without difficulty. He sat up for 2 hours in the afternoon, and lay down without being told, which she noted with a kind of professional approval. By evening he was asking questions again, the quiet, considered kind that she was finding to be his characteristic mode. He asked about the village, about old May, about the house and how long she had lived in it. He did not ask intrusive questions. He asked questions that seemed to be building a picture rather than extracting information, and she found she did not mind answering them. She told him about her mother and what the house had been like with her in it. She told him about taking up with May and what that work had taught her. She did not tell him more than she chose to tell, but she told him more than she had expected to. He listened the way people listen when they are actually interested, rather than waiting to speak. At some point in the evening he said, "You have not asked me anything. I told you I would not push." "I know." A pause. "I thought you might change your mind." She looked at him. "I said what I meant." He looked back at her. Something in his expression changed, very slightly, some adjustment she could not name precisely. "I know," he said again, "but differently." She went to add wood to the fire, because the evening had gone cold, and the conversation needed somewhere to go besides where it was heading. She stood at the hearth a moment. "Sleep," she said. "You are better but not there yet. Tomorrow, you can tell me whatever you choose to tell me." She heard him settle back on the cot. She stood at the fire a moment longer. She had been holding her breath for 4 days, she realized, not literally. In the way a person holds their breath when something is uncertain, a constant mild tension that you do not notice until it releases. Something had released. She let out a long, quiet breath. She went back to the table and worked until midnight, and then she went to sleep properly, in her own bed, for the first time in 4 days. Outside the ridge was dark and cold and entirely ordinary. Inside the house was warm and quiet, and also entirely ordinary, except for the man on the cot who was sleeping for the first time without the fever's grip, and the burial cloth on the shelf, with its silver moons not visible in the dark, and the woman who had made it now sleeping too, and the morning that was coming, that was going to require both of them to be ready for it. On the 6th day, he stood at the window. He stood with one hand on the wall and the other at his side, looking out at the ridge slope beyond the glass. He moved around the room now, carefully and deliberately, no longer requiring the cot except to sleep. He managed the dressings himself, which she had taught him on the 4th day, and he managed his meals, and he managed the careful, measured rebuilding of his body, with the same controlled discipline she had observed in everything else about how he occupied the world. She was at the work table with the curtain order, working steadily in the clear winter morning light. She was also watching the ring. She had been watching it since the previous morning, when she was checking the shoulder wound. The angle was right, and the lamp was good, and the dark oval stone had resolved itself into a clear, specific image. A wolf mid-leap. Head forward, body extended. The whole animal in the posture of something moving at full speed toward whatever it was going for. She knew this mark. Not from close experience. From the way you knew things in a border village, from accumulated listening over 24 years, from the comments of traders and travelers, and May's occasional patients from the upper territories who let things slip. The wolf mid-leap on a dark stone set in heavy silver was the mark of the Dray line. Everybody in Kale's Ridge knew the Dray name, even those who could not have explained exactly what it attached to. The largest wolf territory north of the ridge, the oldest bloodline in the region, the Alpha line. She set down her needle. She said, without preamble, because preamble would have been a form of dishonesty, "Tell me who you are." He turned from the window. He looked at her across the room. She said, "I saw the ring properly yesterday. I know what mark that is." He came to the table and sat across from her, moving with the careful, deliberate pace of someone who was significantly better, but was managing the distance back to fully well with patience. He put both hands on the table. The ring caught the light between them. "Gareth Drake," he said, "Alpha King of the Dray line." She looked at the ring, then at him. She went through a quiet, rapid resorting of the past 6 days that did not show on her face but was thorough. "All right," she said. He looked at her steadily. "That is all? What else would you like?" "Most people respond with considerably more. I expect most people who you tell are either subordinate to you or want something from you," she said. "I am neither. I cleaned your wounds because you were dying on my front step and I had the skill to help. Nothing about who you are changes what happened." He was quiet for a moment. "There is something I need to tell you." "All right." He told her about the Marin's claim. He told it carefully. The way she was beginning to understand, he told everything that mattered. He laid it out from the beginning, from the tradition's origins in the oldest law of the Dray bloodline, through what it recognized and why, to what it meant in practical terms when an outsider performed the burial rites for an alpha. Stitched the cloth, kept the vigil, held the threshold between the person and what was waiting on the other side of it. He explained that no outsider had triggered the claim in 4 generations, and he said this plainly, watching her while he said it. She listened to all of it, without interrupting. He noticed this. She could see that he noticed it, the very small shift in his expression that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to it, as though he had prepared for questions partway through and she had not provided them. When he finished, she was quiet for a full minute. She sat with the information the way she sat with a complicated pattern, before beginning to work on it, looking for where the logic held, and where it had gaps. Then she said, "I did not agree to any of this." "No," he said. "I stitched the cloth because someone was dying in my house, and I come from a tradition that says the dying deserve care and preparation," she said. "That is the complete extent of what I did. I was not participating in your law. I did not know your law existed. A person cannot be bound by a tradition they have never encountered and never chose to enter." "You are correct," he said. She had been building toward the argument, and the agreement stopped her short. She looked at him. "You are correct," he said again. "The claim cannot bind you. It has no legitimate hold on someone who did not choose its terms. You acted from your own tradition, your own reasons, completely outside any knowledge of mine." She was quiet for a moment. "Then who does it bind?" she said. He held her gaze across the table. "Me," he said. The words sat between them without moving. She said, "What does that mean, practically?" "It means I am required by the oldest law of my line to acknowledge what you did for me," he said. "Not as a transaction, not as a debt I can settle with goods or favor, as something that made a claim on my honesty. I cannot leave here and return to my territory and pretend you did not do what you did. The claim requires that I offer what I can in return. But the choice of whether to receive that offer belongs entirely to you." She looked at him for a long time. The fire was steady. Outside, the ridge was gray and still, under a flat winter sky. The burial cloth was on the shelf behind her, and she was aware of it without looking at it. "What is it that you can offer?" she said. "Acknowledgement," he said. "Protection of this house and everyone in it, formally granted by pack law, which means something in a border village. Access, if you ever need it. And," he stopped. He looked at her directly. "The truth, which is that what you did for me is the most honest thing anyone has ever done for me, and I wanted you to know that I know that." She sat with this. She understood that he was not trying to purchase her or flatter her. She could hear the difference. She had been in enough conversations to know the difference between a man saying something because he wanted a specific response, and a man saying something because it was what he had come to. "I need you to go," she said. He did not argue. He did not push against it or try to negotiate. He looked at her for one more moment, then he nodded once, and he stood. He dressed with the careful self-management she had come to recognize. He was slower with the fastenings near the shoulder, where the wound was still healing, and he managed them without asking for help. When he was done, he stood with his coat on and his boots laced, and he was, suddenly, clearly not the dying man she had pulled through her door. He was something else, someone with a territory and a title and a world she did not know waiting for him. He stopped at the door. He turned back. He looked at the shelf above the workbench, at the folded linen sitting there with its silver edge just visible. He did not ask for it. She did not offer it. He left. She heard his footsteps on the front path, clear and even, not the crawling drag of the man who had arrived. She stood in the middle of the room and listened until she could not hear them anymore, and the ridge sounds reasserted themselves around the ordinary silence of her house. She went to the shelf. She took the burial cloth down and held it in both hands, standing at the work table with the gray winter light coming through the window. She held it for a long time. She did not think anything in particular. She looked at the silver moons along the hem. She looked at the black thread through the center seam. She thought about her mother's hands making this same pattern on different cloth for different people. She put it back. She sat down. She picked up her needle. She went back to the curtain order, because the family who had ordered it was running out of patience, and the work did not do itself while she stood, holding cloth and not thinking. She worked. The house felt very quiet. Not in the way it had been quiet before, because the before quiet was the baseline she had been living in for 3 years, and she had not been conscious of it as a quality. This was a different quiet. This was the quiet of a space that had held 2 people and now held 1, and the difference between those 2 things was perceptible in a way she could not explain, and was not going to examine today. She worked until evening. She ate dinner standing at the work table. She did not look at the shelf again. In the Northern Territory, just past the second line of trees, Gareth Drake walked back through a landscape he had known all his life, and found that it looked exactly as it always had, and also entirely different, which was not a thing he had a ready language for, so he filed it and kept walking. Wren Calloway saw him coming from the upper lookout point. She had been watching for 2 days, which she would tell him later as a practical matter, and not as an admission of what those 2 days had cost her. She came down from the lookout and met him on the central path, and for 2 full seconds, she let her relief show on her face, before she put it away, and became the beta again. 6 days, she said, walking beside him. I know. The territory has been managed. There were no crises. I expected that from you. Elder Croft has requested a council session. Gareth said nothing. He walked at the even, deliberate pace of a man who was not fully well, and was not going to admit it to anyone. He has concerns about the Marin's claim situation, Wren said. I know what his concerns are, Gareth said. Schedule the council for Thursday morning. I will hear him directly. And the woman. A silence. She sent me away, he said. Wren absorbed this without visible reaction. Then what are your instructions? He was quiet for a moment. They reached the door of the main building. He put his hand on the frame and stopped, looking at nothing in particular beyond the door. Give me 2 weeks, he said. Then I want to send her something. I need to think about what. Wren waited. She made the burial cloth, he said. He said it quietly, not to Wren, not exactly. More like someone placing an object down carefully so it did not break. Wren looked at his face. She was a person who made detailed assessments quickly and kept them accurate over time. She made one now and kept it to herself, because the timing was wrong, and because there were some things that only showed their shape after you had carried them for a while. Thursday, she said. I will prepare the council room. She went to find Elder Croft. Gareth stood in the doorway for another moment, looking at the ridgeline visible over the settlement's eastern edge. He thought about a woman at a work table in the middle of the night, with a needle in her hand and pale linen across her lap. He went inside. The next 2 weeks in Kale's Ridge were ordinary in the surface way, that things are ordinary when the person inside them is managing something privately. Nora finished the curtain order and delivered it. She took on 2 new pieces. She went to the market on Thursday as she had promised Vera, and bought what she needed, and said good morning to people, and gave appropriate answers to the questions she was asked, and did not say anything about the past week that required saying. She told old May a partial truth. I had a patient, a man with serious wounds. He is gone now. He will be fine. May had looked at her with those eyes that saw into the spaces between things and said, how serious? And Nora had said, bad enough. And May had said, in the way that was not acceptance, but was a decision to let it be for now. Vera brought bread twice more than usual, which was her way of communicating that she knew something had happened, and was lodging her awareness without requiring an account. Nora accepted the bread, and gave nothing. At night, working by lamplight, she sometimes looked at the shelf. She looked at the folded burial cloth and she thought about what she was thinking about, which was not useful, and then she went back to her work. She did not pretend to herself that she was not thinking about it. She simply did not examine what she was thinking closely enough to have to do anything about it, which was a strategy that had a limited lifespan but was serving her adequately for now. The 11th day after he left, someone knocked on the door. 2 knocks. A pause. 1 more. Formal and even. Nora set down her needle. She opened the door. The woman on the step was in her early 30s, with a face arranged by long practice into something that gave away very little unless it chose to. She stood straight in the way of someone for whom posture had long since stopped being a choice. She was dressed practically and without ornamentation. She held herself with the particular quality of someone who was very good at their work and knew it without needing to announce it. My name is Wren Calloway, the woman said. I am the beta of the Dray line. I have been asked to bring you something. She held out a small wooden box. You had better come in, Nora said. Wren came inside and looked around the room once, quickly, with the assessment of someone trained to read spaces in seconds and retain what they found. She noted the work table, the supply chest, the arrangement of tools and materials that told a coherent story about the person who had arranged them. Her gaze stopped at the shelf above the workbench for just a moment, where the folded linen sat with its silver edge visible. She looked away from it without comment and sat at the table. She set the wooden box between them and opened it. 3 things, she said. Her voice had the measured quality of someone completing a task correctly. First, a formal releasing document signed by Gareth Drake and witnessed by the full Pack Council, acknowledging the conditions of the Marin's claim, and releasing you entirely from any obligation or claim under Pack law, now or at any future time. It is complete and unconditional. She named the second item. A carved figurine from the Drake family collection, 6 generations old. Gareth gives it as a gift that carries no condition and expects no response. She named the third. A letter. She closed the box without another word and sat with her hands folded on the table, waiting. Nora looked at the box, then at Wren. She had been building an impression of this woman since the door opened, and the impression was of someone who gave things away sparingly and measured every word before releasing it. She also had the clear sense that Wren had not come solely to deliver the box. What did you want to say, Nora said, that you were not sent to say? A very brief stillness. Then, with the quality of someone making a decision they had already made, he has not slept well since he returned. Nora waited. He manages the territory, Wren said. He attends the council sessions. He does everything required, but he is not the same as before he went to the Ridge. She looked at Nora directly. I am not asking you to do anything with this. I thought you should have it, because he cannot give it to you himself, and I believe you should have accurate information. Nora held her gaze. Why? Because whatever you decide, it should be decided with the full picture, Wren said. Not the one he would present, which would be shorter and more careful than the truth. She stood. He is a good man, she said. Not a simple one, but a good one. She adjusted her jacket. I will see myself out. She left. Nora sat at the table in the quiet, with the box in front of her. She opened it again. She picked up the releasing document first, and unfolded it, and read through it completely. It said exactly what Wren had said it would say. Clean, thorough, binding in its release, as the claim had been in its inception. She set it aside. She picked up the carved wolf figurine. It was small enough to sit in her palm, carved from dark wood, a wolf in a seated position with its head raised. Not the aggressive, leaping posture of the ring's crest. This one was still, patient. Something in the posture spoke of an animal that was fully present in its own nature, not performing it, not reaching toward anything, simply being exactly what it was. The detail in it was extraordinary. Someone had made this with genuine care for the subject, care that showed in every line. She held it for a while. She set it on the table. She picked up the letter. She had looked at the outside of it before picking it up. Her name written in a hand that was even and legible and neither formal nor casual, the hand of a person who wrote as they thought, without performance. She opened it and read. He did not explain himself. He did not construct a case or attempt persuasion. He wrote as a person writes when they have decided that honesty is the only currency worth spending, and that anything else is a waste of the limited resource of another person's attention. He wrote about the 8 days in her house with the precise, observed quality of someone who had been paying close attention, even when demonstrating it had not been possible. He wrote about waking in the night and watching her work at the table, and what his mother had told him, and what the claim meant to him personally rather than legally, making the distinction between those two things clearly and holding it throughout. He wrote about what it meant that she had acted from her own tradition, from her own reasons, without knowledge of his, and how that absence of calculation made the act itself something he did not have adequate language for. He wrote about the specific detail of the silver moons along the hem, and what his mother had said about what those moons meant, and that he had kept that meaning for over 30 years, without a moment to put it to use, until he was lying on her cot in the lamplight watching her hands move. He wrote, on the last page, with the same even, direct hand, I have spent the days since returning, attempting to make my life worth the return. I do not know whether I have succeeded. I am trying to find out. I thought you should know that I am trying. Nora put the letter down. She picked it up and read it again. She read it a third time, more slowly, going back over certain paragraphs to see what they held from a different angle. She read it a fourth time, in the way you read something when you are not sure yet what it means for you, but you know it means something. She set it down flat on the table. She put both hands over it. She looked at the carved wolf figurine on the table. She looked at the shelf, at the burial cloth. She sat for a long time in the quiet of the room that she had been sitting in for 3 years alone, and had been sitting in for the past 11 days, with the specific different quality of alone that comes after. She went to bed. She did not sleep much. She lay in the dark and thought about what was actually in front of her, which was her practice with difficult things, going past the feelings to the actual situation. What was actually in front of her was this. A man who had been dying on her front step had survived, and had been honest with her about something complicated, and had sent her a document releasing her from the only claim he had on her, and a gift with no conditions, and a letter that was the most honest thing she had read in years. And she had sent him away, which she had been right to do, and she still did not know what came next. What she knew was that doing nothing was also a choice, and not a neutral one. The releasing document changed the landscape. Before it, there was a claim, and she had been right to put space between herself and it while she thought. Now there was no claim. Now there was only whatever was actually here, underneath all the old law and circumstance. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling. In the morning she got up before the light. She made tea, and stood at the window with the cup in both hands, and looked at the ridge. The frost was on the eastern slope, the sky above it pale and very clear. The path going up from the village was visible, running straight and empty through the frost-silver grass. She drank the tea. She went to the corner of the room and pulled her traveling bag from under the bed. She set it open on the floor and looked at it for a moment. Then she went through the house methodically, putting things in, clothing for 2 or 3 days, her medicine tin, the bread from yesterday, most of a loaf, practical things, chosen for practical reasons, placed without drama. She picked up the wolf figurine from the table and put it in the bag. She went to the shelf. She lifted down the burial cloth and held it in both hands. She put it back on the shelf. She stood looking at it. She picked it up again. She put it in the bag. She latched the bag closed. She put on her coat. She took her key from the hook by the door. She stepped outside onto the front step where she had found him, and the cold came in immediately, and the morning was blue and gray and beginning. She locked the door behind her. She looked up the path. She began to walk north. The path up through the village and into the ridge was familiar to her as far as the tree line, where the maintained ground gave way to something older and less tended. She had walked this far many times. She had not been further. Past the first tree line, the slope opened out into a wide stretch of open ridge that looked different from inside than it did from the village below. Larger, quieter, with a quality to the air she could not name precisely, except to say it was sharper. The light came differently up here, more direct and less filtered. She walked at a steady pace that she could hold for a long time, which was what she chose when she did not know how long a walk would take. The landscape shifted again, beyond the second tree line, a narrower, older growth of spruce that marked a boundary she had been told about, but had not understood until she was inside it. The ground underfoot changed character, more varied, mixed with rock and patches of frozen earth. The air smelled different, older, somehow, as though the cold had been accumulating there longer than a season. She understood she had crossed into Dre territory before she saw any marker, because something in the air changed in a way she registered before her mind had words for it. She stopped and stood still and let it settle. Then she kept walking. 2 figures were waiting around the next turn in the path. One was older, experienced looking, with the stillness of someone who had been doing this kind of work for a long time and had long since stopped performing it. The younger one was perhaps 20, and was managing his surprise with the visible effort of someone who had not yet made a habit of hiding it. Nora Voss, the older one said. It was not a question. Yes, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Your reason for entering Dre territory? I have come to speak with Gareth Drake, she said. He knows my name. Something small and quick moved across the older guard's face and resolved itself into a decision. Dan, he said, without moving his eyes from her. Take the message. The younger one, Dan, looked at her for one more moment with unguarded curiosity before he turned and went quickly up the path. The older guard remained. Owen, he said, in case you need it. Thank you, she said. Owen said nothing further. He stood at his position and was professionally quiet. She stood where she was and was also quiet. The cold was steady, and the sky was clear, and the ridge above them was very still. After a few minutes, Dan tried conversation. He asked about the weather in the village, and she answered simply. He asked how long the walk had taken her, and she answered that too. After that they were all 3 quiet together, which she found more comfortable than the attempts. It was almost 40 minutes before Wren came down the path. She moved quickly, and without the deliberate, measured pace of her usual presentation. Something in the speed of it told Nora that Wren had been waiting for this, had perhaps been prepared for this, and had been not quite sure it was going to happen until it did. She stopped in front of Nora, and something crossed her face briefly. You came, she said. Yes, Nora said. Wren made a small adjustment to her expression, and became professionally composed again. This way, she said. She led the way up the path and into the settlement. It was larger than Nora had imagined. She had built a picture in her head from the word territory and the word pack, which had given her something more encamped and less permanent than what she walked into. This was a community. Buildings that had settled into the ground over years, paths worn by long regular use, gardens showing evidence of seasonal care. It had its own logic, its own particular way of organizing space and function, and it was simply different from what she knew, not lesser, not greater, just arranged by a different set of priorities. People looked at her as she passed. She looked back at them, with the same quality of direct, open attention, because she had always found that meeting a gaze clearly was more dignified than avoiding it. A young man standing near one of the buildings stared at her with a frankness that was past courtesy. Wren glanced at him briefly with an expression that communicated one complete quiet instruction, and he found something else to look at. The main building was stone, lower and less imposing than she had constructed in her imagination. Inside it was warm, and had the smell of a fire kept going for years, and there were bookshelves that showed genuine use, and a large table covered in maps, and a quality to the space of work being done here regularly, rather than ceremony being staged here occasionally. He was standing at the far wall. He turned when she came in. He had been looking at one of the maps, or thinking, or both, and the turn was deliberate, something he chose to do rather than a startled reaction. He was standing fully upright, completely recovered, and what she noticed first and most clearly was that he was entirely himself here. Solid in a way that was different from anything she had seen in her house, because here he was in his ground, and a person standing in their ground is a different thing from a person standing anywhere else. She walked to the middle of the room. A beat of silence. I am not here because of the claim, she said. I know, he said. I am here because of the letter. He waited. "I want to know what kind of man you are," she said, "when you are not dying." Something changed in his face. Small, not dramatic, but real. Something that had been held, came slightly open. "Give me the chance to show you," he said. She looked at him. "I have questions first," she said. "Practical ones." "Ask them," he said. They talked for a long time. She asked about the territory, and how it was managed, and what the relationship with the human settlements along the border looked like from his side of the line. She asked about the Marin's claim, and what it cost him personally, rather than legally, and he distinguished between those two things clearly, and held the distinction. She asked about the wounds, who had given them, and whether that situation had been resolved. He answered everything directly. When two answers were complicated by things he could not share fully, he said so, and told her why, which she found more satisfying than if he had answered without qualification. "Come back in 2 weeks," she said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "To Kale's Ridge," she said. "Come to my territory." A pause. "I will come to you," he said. "Good," she said. 2 weeks. She picked up her bag. He walked her to the main door. Wren appeared to escort her back to the boundary, which Nora had expected. At the door, Gareth stopped, and she stopped, and he said, "You walked up from the village alone, in the cold." "I have legs," she said. "I know how to use them." At the corner of his mouth, briefly, something moved that might have been the beginning of a smile, before he set it back into place. She walked back down the ridge with Wren, who was quiet for most of it, and at the boundary said simply, "He will come," as though confirming something she had already known for the past 11 days. Nora walked home in the late afternoon light. She unlocked her door. She put her bag down. She took out the wolf figurine and set it on the shelf beside the burial cloth. She stood and looked at both of them for a moment. Then she started dinner, because it was past 5 and she was hungry from the walk, and the world did not pause for anyone's significant moments. He came on a Thursday morning, 14 days later. Vera saw him first. This was inevitable. Vera saw everything that entered or moved through the visible portion of Kale's Ridge, which was most of it, and she had the particular talent for being in the right place to observe things that would have been remarkable in a less motivated person. She knocked on Nora's door with the specific energy of someone carrying news that has been pressing against the inside of them since it was acquired. "There is a very large man," Vera said, coming up the path. "He stopped and asked 2 different people where your house is. He is almost at the end of the lane." "Thank you, Vera," Nora said. She put on her coat and went out to meet him before he reached the door. He was walking up the path alone. No guard, no companion, nothing that identified him as anything other than a man walking up a village path on a Thursday morning. She noticed this immediately, and understood immediately that it was a choice, and that it was not the sensible choice, and that he had made it anyway. The village was watching. It always watched new things, quietly, from windows and doorways and the natural loitering that formed wherever unusual events gathered. She was aware of it. He was aware of it too. She could tell from the quality of his attention, but he did not adjust himself for it. He walked the same way he walked everywhere. 14 days, she said when he reached her. "Yes," he said. "Come in," she said. She made tea. They sat at the work table and talked with a different quality than before, less formal, less guarded, both of them further from the beginning, and willing to let that show in how they sat and how they spoke. He looked around the house in daylight, with curiosity that was open, rather than intrusive. "Can I see the village?" he said. She looked at him. "You want to?" "Yes." She considered this for a moment, then she put her coat back on. The walk through Kale's Ridge took longer than it should have because of interruptions. Vera materialized within 8 minutes of them leaving the house, appearing from around the corner of the lower lane, with the conviction of someone who had been planning this moment since Nora's door opened. Nora made the introduction briefly. He was patient and decent with Vera's questions, in a way that was unexpected, answering them without condescension, and without letting anything private slip. He gave her enough to satisfy the surface of her curiosity, and was apparently quite good at knowing exactly where that surface was. When they had freed themselves from Vera and turned toward the lower village, Nora's intended route went around Old May's house by 20 yards. May was standing in her doorway. She had the expression of someone who had been standing there long enough to arrange their waiting into something casual. "Nora," she said. Then, looking at Gareth with the direct, comprehensive assessment she gave to everything she wanted to understand, "And this is Gareth Drake." "Old May," Nora began. "I know who it is," May said pleasantly. "I am old, not uninformed. Come in for a moment. Both of you. I have something on the fire." What happened in the next half hour was not what Nora had planned, partly because she had not planned for May to be waiting in her doorway, and partly because she had not anticipated what would happen when the two of them were in the same room. They took to each other. Not carefully, not with the diplomatic effort of two people finding neutral ground. Naturally, the way it happened when two people discovered within the first 10 minutes that they thought about things in the same register. May asked him about the pack's eastern boundary management, which she knew about from years of treating patients from the borderland, and his answer was the kind that showed a mind that had gone past the immediate problem to its underlying structure. May respected this. Gareth, in turn, found something to respect in the plain-spoken certainty of a woman who had been managing the consequences of other people's decisions for 60-odd years, and had arrived at opinions that were both well-founded and held lightly enough not to become a cage. May said something about a medicinal plant that grew on the northern slope above the tree line, something she had been curious about for years without access to it. Gareth answered, and then he said something else she had not expected, and May laughed the sharp, genuine laugh she saved for things that actually surprised her. Nora sat in the corner of May's kitchen and said nothing. She watched May lean forward slightly in her chair, the way she did when a conversation was interesting. She watched Gareth's expression, which had relaxed into something different from its usual configuration. Something less guarded, responding to May's directness with his own. She watched the two of them together, and felt something she would have described, pressed for a word, as a mild and private structural shift in how she understood the situation. She had expected this to require management. It was not requiring management. It was simply happening, with the easy naturalness of two people who suited each other's company, and neither of them was looking to her for guidance, and she found that she was glad about this, in a way she was also slightly surprised by. They left May's house after 30 minutes. May stood in the doorway as they were going, and said to both of them, without specifying which of them she meant more, "Come back, either of you, or both." Then she went back inside. They walked the rest of the village route, and came back up the lane, and sat on the low stone wall outside Nora's house. The afternoon was cold and very clear, the ridge above them sharp against the pale sky, the frost having burned off the lower slopes by midday, but still visible on the upper face. Nora said, "The Pack Council's attitude toward the human settlements on your border." He was quiet for a moment. "Useful as buffer territory, not worth significant engagement." "And your attitude?" Another pause. Longer. "Different." "Different how?" "The settlements have resources and access points the Pack needs," he said. "The Pack has capabilities the settlements benefit from. A wall between two parties who need each other is less valuable than an exchange. And the Council does not see it that way. The Council has old habits," he said. "I am working on changing them." "How?" "Slowly," he said, with more evidence than argument. She looked at him sideways. "That must cost you something, to be slow when you could use authority instead." "Yes," he said. "But you do it that way anyway. An argument I win by force of position gets reversed when my position changes," he said. "Evidence is harder to reverse. It stays." She was quiet for a moment. "That is a good answer," she said. "I know. I worked it out over years of getting it wrong first, which is the only reliable way to work anything out." She looked at him for a moment. He was not being modest. He was not performing humility. He was stating the history of the thing the same way he stated everything, as information rather than presentation. "All right," she said. The afternoon moved into evening, without either of them marking where the line was. She was aware of the time, and she left it where it was. The conversation moved across a range of things: the ridge geography, a particular rock formation on the western face that he could see from his territory, and she had seen from the village path her whole life. May's theory about the northern slope plant. They disagreed twice about small things, and both disagreements were brief and direct, and neither of them felt the need to resolve them completely. At some point he said, "I should go before the full dark." "Yes," she said. They stood. There was a moment. Not long. The air between them had a quality that was different from an hour ago, different from the morning, different from anything in the 6 days he had spent on her cot. She was aware of it. She did not name it. He did not name it either. He turned and went up the ridge path. She stood at the edge of the stone wall and watched him go. The ridge took him gradually, the path curving, the dark coming in from the east. She stood until she could not see him anymore. She went back inside. She stood in the middle of the room. She touched the burial cloth on the shelf. She did not do this consciously. Her hand moved there, while she was thinking about something else. She left her hand there for a moment. Then she started the fire properly, because the evening had gone cold and she had let it drop while they were outside, and the house needed warmth, and these were things she knew how to do. The weeks after that first Thursday visit built into a pattern that neither of them discussed or named. He came to Cale's Ridge on a Thursday every 2 weeks. She went to the Pack territory on the alternating weeks, often on a Tuesday, because Tuesday was a quiet day in the village, and no one expected her for anything. Between visits they did not send letters or messages, which was a choice they had not made explicitly, but had arrived at by the same instinct. The visits were the thing. The space between them was its own kind of presence. She brought food the third time she went north, a dish from her mother's recipe made in a ceramic pot that she carried up the ridge wrapped in cloth to keep it warm. Hale, the young pack member who had been officially appointed as her welcomer by no one except himself, received the pot with the seriousness of someone entrusted with an important diplomatic artifact, and returned it the following week, cleaned, and with a note in Wren's handwriting that said only, "It was good." Hale had appointed himself. This was simply the fact of the situation. He appeared at the boundary when she arrived, and escorted her in, and talked steadily about everything that had happened in the territory since her last visit, a service that was simultaneously useful and slightly chaotic, since Hale's assessment of what was important, and Nora's did not always overlap. Wren and Nora had arrived, somewhere in the second month, at something between friendship and professional respect that suited them both. It had the quality of two people who measured their words carefully, and therefore trusted each other's words when they were given. Wren told her things sometimes that she had not been sent to tell her, small precise things about the territory or the pack or Gareth specifically, that were clearly chosen to fill gaps she thought Nora should not have. In the 7th week, Wren told her about Elder Croft's formal council session. She gave the professional version, careful and balanced, the version that managed information without lying. Nora listened to all of it and then said, "What did Croft actually say? Not the version that has been prepared for me." Wren paused. She gave a somewhat more complete version. Nora listened and identified the places in the account where the pacing changed slightly, where Wren was still smoothing something over. She did not push. She filed what she had and thought about what the gaps probably contained. She waited 3 days to see whether Gareth would tell her himself. On the 3rd evening, sitting at his table over the maps with a disagreement about the best route from the eastern boundary to the spring source, he set the maps aside. "I need to tell you about the council session," he said. She looked at him. She said, "All right." He told her all of it. Elder Croft's specific arguments, laid out point by point, about the compromise of an alpha's authority, implied by a human bond, the precedent it set, the signal it sent to neighboring territories. Lady Avery's measured additions, the 2 younger council members who had been opposed from the start, quietly and consistently. He told her what he had said in response. He had not used his authority to end the session. He had not made it about what he was permitted to do as Alpha King. He had produced, over the course of the following hour, a systematic, evidenced case for the practical value of what had already changed in the relationship with Cale's Ridge in the past months. Trade access. Intelligence about movements in the lower territories that the village was positioned to observe, and the pack was not. The goodwill of a human settlement that sat on the pack's most vulnerable approach, which was worth considerably more as an ally than as a neutral party. He had made it into a practical argument because political challenges needed practical answers, and an alpha who responded to a challenge with authority alone was an alpha who had taught his council that authority was all he had. Nora listened to all of it. She said, "You did not fight them." "No," he said. "You showed them." "Yes." "That is better," she said. "I thought so." She said, "How many shifted?" "Enough," he said. She understood what the enough covered. Not Croft, she said. No. They sat with that for a moment. He will come around or he will not, she said. You cannot make a person decide to see something they have decided not to see. You can only be consistent until the evidence is too large to argue with. Yes, he said. That is exactly it. She looked at him across the table. She said, I am beginning to think this is simply how your mind works. Yes, he said. He sounded neither pleased nor troubled by this. Simply confirmed. The Gil Morrow situation had happened 2 weeks before the council session, in the market on a Thursday morning, in front of 4 other people, and the general ambient awareness of the market square, which meant in practice, in front of everyone in Cales Ridge, within approximately 6 hours. Gil had been in the village Nora's entire life, 5 years older than her, a man with firm opinions about other people's choices, who had the particular quality of believing his opinions to be concern rather than interference. He had never been directly unkind to her. He had simply always been present with his views in a way she had always been present with her decision to not care about them, and this had functioned adequately as an arrangement, until the Thursday morning he said, in front of 4 people and the market square, that people in the village might start to have questions about where Nora Voss's loyalties lay, given how often she was spending time in wolf territory. The market square went very quiet. Nora stopped at her stall. She looked at Gil for a moment. Then she said, in a voice that was completely level and carried precisely the weight she intended it to carry, that her time and her choices were her own, that his concern about them was both unwelcome and unnecessary, and that if she ever found herself wanting his opinion on her life, she would let him know, and she expected he should not wait for that occasion. She said all of this simply and clearly, and without heat, which made it more effective than heat would have been. Gil went away. He did not speak to her directly again. Vera had been at the market and had seen it. Within about 2 days, through a chain that went Vera to Hale to Wren, Gareth knew. He came the following Thursday, and somewhere in the middle of the evening, not making it a thing, said, Did you handle the situation at the market? Yes, she said. He said, I know you did. I wanted you to know that I know. She looked at him for a moment. She nodded once. That was the end of it. The burial cloth came out on a Tuesday evening in the 3rd month. She had not planned it. She had gotten up to retrieve the piece she was hemming for the following day, and her hands had gone to the burial cloth instead. She had not corrected the mistake. She had set it on the table between them in the quiet of the room, the fire gone low, neither of them having said much for a while, which was a kind of quiet they had both gotten used to, and both found, independently, more comfortable than most conversations. He was still. Then he reached out and touched the silver moon border, the same deliberate, careful touch as the first time, one finger along the hem. She said, I want to tell you what I was thinking when I made this. He looked at her. She said, I thought you were going to die. I did not know your name, or what kind of person you were, or what your life had cost. But you were in my house, and you had come a long way to get there, and I did not want you to go out of the world without something that said someone had stopped and seen you before you left. The fire settled. Outside, the ridge was dark and very still. He said quietly, That is the truest thing anyone has ever made for me. Most things made for me are made by people who know what I am. This was made for a man you did not know the name of. That is different. She looked at him. He said, I want to ask you something. She said, Ask. He looked at the cloth, then at her. Will you let me wear this at our ceremony? He said. She looked at him without speaking. He said, In the Dre mating ceremony, the cloth that goes over both shoulders should be something true. The truest thing that has ever been made for me is this cloth. You made it in the dark, for a life you did not know, with nothing to gain. That is the kind of truth I want to carry into what comes next. She looked at the silver moons along the hem for a long time. She looked at the black thread running through the center. She looked at the work of those candle-lit hours when she had believed he was dying and had chosen to prepare for it with her best skill. She said, Only if we do the ceremony at the border. He looked at her. My village on one side, she said. Your pack on the other. The ceremony at the line between them. Neither of us gives up our ground. He was quiet for a moment. Then, at the corner of his mouth, something opened. Small and real, from somewhere below the surface. Is that a yes? She said. "That is a yes," he said. She put the burial cloth back on the shelf. They went back to the ordinary business of the evening, talking about May's theory again, about the spring route, about a particular exchange at the boundary gate 2 days ago that Hale had reported with characteristic earnest detail. The evening was the same as before, and also not the same. Lighter in some quality she did not try to name, the way a room feels after something that had been uncertain for a long time settles into a shape. The weeks between yes and the ceremony had their own particular texture. They were not waiting weeks, exactly. Waiting implied suspension, the sense of a life put on hold until a future moment arrived. These weeks were not like that. They were full of the ordinary work and the ordinary rhythm of visits and conversations that had built up over months, and the knowledge of what was coming was more like a quality of the light in the room than a separate event on the horizon. It was simply there, present in everything, not demanding to be talked about constantly because the decision had already been made, and what remained was the living toward it. There were things that had to be arranged, and they arranged them. Wren and Old May apparently organized the ceremony logistics between themselves without being asked to, and without informing Nora or Gareth of what they were arranging, which both of them discovered only gradually, and which both of them privately found exactly right. There are people who understand that the most useful thing they can offer in certain situations is to take the practical weight without requiring acknowledgement, and both Wren and May were those people. Nora went to the Pack territory on a Tuesday in the 4th month and found that Hale had taken it upon himself to explain to her, in considerable detail, the traditional structure of a Dray mating ceremony. He did this with the seriousness of someone who has been given an important responsibility, and the slight inaccuracy of someone who was 20 years old and had absorbed the information through proximity rather than formal study. Wren corrected him 4 times with the efficient patience of long practice. Nora listened to all of it and asked the questions that seemed most useful. She asked about the cloth, specifically, what it meant in the Dray tradition when it went over both shoulders. Wren explained, the cloth that covered 2 people in the ceremony was required to be something that had earned its place, something that carried the truth of the 2 people underneath it. A new cloth, purchased for the occasion, held no meaning. A cloth inherited or passed down meant the ceremony spoke of the past rather than the present. What Gareth wanted was something that spoke of exactly what had happened between them, which was why the linen she had made for his burial was the only appropriate thing. She listened to this. She thought about those nights at the work table, with the lamplight and the silver thread. She thought, I made that without knowing any of this, and it turns out to be exactly right, which is either an extraordinary coincidence or something much simpler than coincidence, which is that things made with genuine care tend to end up where they belong. Lady Avery came to find her during that same visit, which was unexpected. Lady Avery was on the Pack Council, had been the measured, careful second voice in Elder Croft's formal challenge, and had in the months since then shifted steadily if not noisily toward a different position. She was in her 50s, with a quality about her of someone who had learned the difference between a strong opinion and a correct one, and who had applied this distinction regularly over enough decades to have made it a kind of wisdom. She said, I want you to know that what Gareth did in the council room was something I have not seen from an alpha in many years. He argued for you without making it about what he was permitted to do. He argued for what was actually true. That requires a specific kind of confidence that is rarer than the other kind. Nora looked at her. Why are you telling me this? Because you should know what he did for you, in a room you were not in, Lady Avery said. He does not tell people about the things he does for them. He considers it unnecessary. I think he is wrong about that. Some things should be said. She went back to her work. Nora stood in the path for a moment after she left. She went to find Gareth and told him what Lady Avery had said. He listened. He said nothing. She could see that he was slightly uncomfortable with it, which was information. She said, She thinks you are wrong about not telling people what you do for them. I heard her, he said. I think she is right, Nora said. A pause. All right, he said. The week before the ceremony, Nora took the burial cloth off the shelf and sat with it at the work table for an hour. She examined the stitching carefully, the way she examined all her work at a distance of time, looking for what she would do differently and what she would do the same. The stitching was what it was, even and careful. The silver moons were correct. The black thread through the center ran straight. She had done what she set out to do, which was to give this cloth, and the life it was being prepared for, her best. She folded it back up. She thought about what it was going to mean for it to be laid across two sets of shoulders at a boundary line between two worlds on a morning that had not happened yet. She thought, my mother would have understood this perfectly. Ida Voss had believed all her life that what you made with care became, in some way, part of the world it was made in, and stayed that way, regardless of whether the original purpose was served. A table built for a family that no longer existed was still a well-made table. A burial cloth prepared for a man who did not die was still an act of honest preparation, and the honesty in it did not go away because the death did not come. It had become something else instead. She put the cloth back on the shelf and went to bed and slept well, which was how she knew she had arrived somewhere she could stand. 2 days before the ceremony, Elder Croft sent a formal message to the Pack Council stating that he would not be attending. He gave a reason that was procedural and technical, and that everyone understood was a way of making a statement without making a statement outright. Gareth received this and filed it, and told Wren to log it and move on. He told Nora about it on the Tuesday evening 2 days before. In the direct way he told her things he thought she should know. She said, "Will it affect anything practically?" "No," he said. "Then it is what it is," she said. "Some things take longer than one ceremony." He looked at her. "You are not upset by it," he said. She thought about this honestly. "I would rather he came," she said, "because I would rather the people who matter to you were there. But I am not going to be undone by the absence of someone who is making a statement rather than a decision. Statements change. Decisions take longer, but they last." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "You are going to have to tell me," she said, "when I am being too practical about things. I have been told this before." "I know," he said. "I do not think being too practical is a problem you have. May thinks it is. May has never led a pack council," he said. "Practical is not a flaw in this context." "Tell May that," she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "No," he said. She went back to Kale's Ridge that evening, with the specific feeling of something balanced, the way a piece of work feels when the proportions are right, and the structure is sound, and what remains is simply the finishing. May was waiting outside when she came down the path into the village, standing in the gray evening with her coat on and her hands in her pockets, in the way she waited when she had something to say, and had decided it needed to be said outside and in person. "Come in," Nora said. May came in. She sat at the table. She looked at Nora for a moment, with the assessment that Nora had known her whole life, the look that went past the surface, and found the actual state of things. "You are ready," May said. It was not a question. "Yes," Nora said. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Nora said. "Not because I am certain of every outcome, because I am certain of the choice." May absorbed this. Then she said, "Your mother would have come if she could." Nora said, "I know that." A silence. "She would have had opinions about the silver thread on the hem," May said. "She would have checked every stitch. And she would have found 3 she wanted to redo," Nora said, "because she always found at least 3. May made a sound that was not quite a laugh but held one inside it. "Ida was a perfectionist," she said. "Yes," Nora said. "So are you," May said. "You got it from her, among other things." She did not say what the other things were. She did not need to. It was the kind of conversation where the most important parts were not in the words but in the understood space around them, and both of them were fluent in that. May went home. Nora sat at the table for a while in the quiet. She thought about all the things that had happened since the crash against her door on a winter night that had seemed at the time to be disrupting the life she had arranged, and which she understood now had been the beginning of the life she had not yet known how to arrange. She thought about the man who had crawled down the ridge to her door, with 3 torn wounds and a fever already climbing. She thought about what it had cost him to get there, and how she had not known, when she pulled him through the doorway, anything about him except that he was trying. She thought about the burial cloth, which she had made as an act of preparation, and which had become something else entirely, and she thought that perhaps this was what all serious preparation was really doing under its surface. not preparing for the specific thing you thought you were preparing for, but developing the quality of readiness itself, so that when the actual thing arrived, whatever shape it took, you met it with work already done and hands already skilled. She went to the shelf. She lifted down the burial cloth one more time and held it, standing at the work table in the lamplight. The silver moons were right. The black thread was straight. The stitching was even, and clean, and done with her best. She put it in the bag she had already packed for the following day. She went to bed. Outside, the ridge was dark and cold and silent, and in 2 days, the borderline between two worlds would hold a ceremony that neither world had a precedent for, and both of them were going to show up and stand there and let it happen, which was not the same as knowing how it would go, but was the only way to find out. She slept well. In the Northern Territory, Gareth Drake sat at his table in the late evening, looking at maps that he was not really reading. Wren came in at some point, and set a cup of tea beside him without comment, and sat across the table and worked on her own papers. After a while she said, "Are you ready?" "Yes," he said. She said nothing more on the subject. They sat in the working quiet for another hour, the fire steady, the territory outside settling into its night rhythms. At some point Gareth put the maps aside and sat with his hands on the table, looking at nothing in particular, with the expression of a man who had been carrying something difficult for a long time, and had arrived at a point where the difficulty no longer felt like weight. Wren looked at him briefly over her papers. She thought, he is ready. Not because everything is resolved, because he has decided, and the decision is real, and real decisions have a quality of settledness that performance decisions do not. She went back to her work. Outside, the ridge was the same ridge it always was, dark and cold, and entirely unconcerned with what was happening at its boundary 2 days from now. The ridge had held this border for centuries, and would hold it for centuries more, and the morning coming in 2 days was just a morning to the ridge, one in a very long series, and it did not know or care that it was the morning everything would be different. But the two people on either side of the boundary knew, and that was enough. The morning of the ceremony came in cold and very clear. The sky over Kale's Ridge was the particular pale white of a winter morning that had decided to be fine, a sky that gave everything below it an unusual sharpness of outline, the kind that made the ridge above look close enough to touch, and the frost on the slope look lit from within. Nora was awake before the sun arrived fully, which was how she was on most mornings, and was not on this one an indication of nerves, so much as the ordinary early waking of a person whose body understood that certain days required more time in them. She made tea, and stood at the window with the cup in both hands. The path going up toward the ridge was visible from here, running straight and frost-pale through the grass. She had walked it in both directions more times than she had counted over the past months. Today she was going to walk it one more time, and when she came back, if she came back in the way she expected to come back, something about how she understood her life would be permanently different from how she had understood it before. She thought about this plainly, without giving it more drama than it contained, which was not nothing, but was also not as large as she had expected it to feel. It felt, mostly, like the specific kind of steadiness she associated with arriving somewhere after a long walk. Not excited, not anxious. Simply here, simply ready. She drank her tea. Old May arrived at the door before the sun was fully up, with the particular energy of someone who had decided that invitation was a concept that did not apply to events this significant. She came in, assessed Nora at the table with her tea, made a sound of measured approval, and went to the kitchen to make something. "Eat," she said, when she came back, setting a plate down. Nora ate. While she ate, she changed into the dress she had made herself over the previous 2 weeks. The good dark blue wool she had been keeping, the specific weight and quality she had been holding back for something worthy of it. She had taken the sleeves apart 3 times before the proportion was right. She had checked the hem on 4 separate occasions. The dress was what she expected her dresses to be, which was exactly right, and that was all it needed to be. May looked at her when she came out. May had a way of looking at things she approved of that did not involve effusion. She simply looked, with that direct and complete attention, and then she said, "Yes." One word, Nora knew what it meant. Vera arrived while Nora was finishing the last of the tea, which was slightly earlier than had been implicitly understood, but was entirely consistent with Vera's nature, when events she cared about were happening. She had brought a ribbon from her own collection, blue-gray, which she held up with the expression of someone presenting a solution to a problem that had not been articulated but definitely existed. Nora looked at the ribbon, and at Vera, and at May. May said, "It works." Vera braided it into the tail of Nora's hair, with the quick, practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing other people's hair at significant moments for 30 years. The result was, Nora admitted privately, better than she would have done on her own. "You look like someone who knows what she is doing," Vera said, which was the highest compliment in Vera's vocabulary. At 9:15, Nora picked up her bag. She had packed it the night before, the small bag with the practical things and the burial cloth folded inside it. She picked it up now and put it over her shoulder, and May and Vera were both already in their coats at the door. Nora said, "I need to walk ahead." May said, "We know." Vera said, "We will be right behind you." Nora looked at them both. These two women who had known her whole life, who had shown up this morning without being asked, who would follow at whatever distance she required. She said, "Thank you." Then she went outside. The cold came in immediately and cleanly, the cold of a winter morning that had decided to cooperate, sharp enough to be present, and not so deep as to be punishing. She stood on the front step for a moment, the same step where she had found him, and she let the morning settle around her. Then she walked north. The village was quiet at this hour, the early domestic sounds of cooking fires and mourning animals, the particular calm of a place going about its ordinary life around the edges of something that was not ordinary. She passed the market square and the lower lane, and the path that went to May's house, and she went up through the village and onto the ridge track, with the frost crunching under her boots and the pale sky above her. She heard, at some distance behind her, the soft footsteps of May and Vera beginning to follow. She did not turn around. She walked at her own pace, which was steady, and the ridge path opened before her the way it always did, familiar to the tree line, and then beyond it, into the country that had become, over the past months, as known to her as anything in her own territory. Past the second tree line, she could hear the gathering before she could see it. Not the sound of voices exactly, just the compound sound of a number of people in a space, the particular quality of a group assembled and waiting that had its own faint texture in the cold air. She walked toward it through the last of the trees and out onto the open section of ridge where the boundary ran, invisible but known, and she stopped. Both groups were present. The pack was on the north side of the boundary line, arranged with the characteristic pack quality of knowing how to occupy space in a way that communicated without announcing. She recognized many faces now, Wren, standing forward and to the left with the composed steadiness that was her constant mode. Hale, slightly to the right, radiating the suppressed excitement of someone very young at something very significant. Lady Avery, further back but clearly there, having made the choice to be present as a statement that was the opposite of Croft's absence. Others she had come to know by name over months of Tuesdays. A number of faces she did not know yet but who had come, and the coming was its own kind of statement. The village group was on the south side. May and Vera had come through the trees behind her, and were settling into position with the slightly uncertain milling of people who had not been given specific instructions, and were working out the protocol in real time. A handful of others from the village whom she recognized and was glad to see. Gareth was at the center of the north group. He was wearing the burial cloth. She had known this was coming. He had told her, they had agreed, she had put the cloth in the bag for this reason, and now he was wearing it, which meant someone had retrieved it from the bag at some point before she arrived, and she found she was not troubled by this but briefly and privately awed. The cloth she had made by candlelight, believing he was going to die, was draped over his shoulders in the clear winter morning, the pale linen against the dark of his coat, the silver moons along the hem catching the light. From this distance, it looked like something that had always been meant to be worn. It looked like something made for exactly this use, and no other. She stood still for a moment. She looked at the cloth. She thought about the needle in her hand, the lamplight, the sound of his breathing from across the room, the decision she had made not to let him go out of the world without care. She thought about all of it in the space of a breath, and then she took the breath and she started walking. Gareth saw her when she was still some distance away. She could tell from the shift in him, small and specific, the way a person shifts when they have been waiting, and the thing they were waiting for has arrived. She walked the last stretch of the boundary path with the frost under her boots and both worlds watching from their respective sides of the invisible line, and the sky clear and cold over everything, and she stopped in front of him. "You came," he said. Quiet, direct, no performance in it. "I said I would," she said. He held out both hands. She reached into the bag and took out the burial cloth and held it for a moment before she placed it in his hands. He received it carefully. He looked at it for a moment. Then he did something she had not anticipated. He handed it back. "Together," he said. "Both of us at once." She understood then. The cloth was not going to be transferred from his shoulders to hers in sequence. It was going to be placed over both of them simultaneously, drawn from both their hands, settling across both their shoulders in a single motion. He held one side of the folded cloth. She held the other. Wren stepped forward on the north side. Old May appeared at Nora's left with a timing that said she had been watching and had understood the moment. The ceremony began with words from the pack tradition, spoken by Wren in the measured, rhythmic cadence of something very old and precisely remembered. A declaration about the nature of the bond, witnessed by the pack and acknowledged by the oldest law, spoken in the formal language that turned individual moments into collective memory. Nora listened to every word. She could not have said afterward whether she understood all of it, but she understood the weight of it, which was sufficient. The village tradition was simpler, which she had always found honest. A holding of hands, left to right, a spoken agreement that what was being undertaken was chosen and continued to be chosen, that the choice was daily rather than once and final. Gareth's left hand and her right hand held together between them. She looked at his hand holding hers, the scarred palm, the old marks across the knuckles, the silver ring, with the wolf mid-leap that she had first noticed, lying on her cot, with a fever burning, and 3 torn wounds stitched shut. She looked at the ring, and remembered pressing 2 fingers to his throat in the dark, looking for a pulse, and finding it. She looked up and found him looking at her. She said, quietly, so only he could hear, "I remember when you could not stand." He said, "I remember when you talked to me about rabbits for 3 hours." She held his gaze. "Did it help?" "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. Then Wren spoke a final phrase from the pack tradition, and May said quietly what was required from the village tradition. And at a signal from both women simultaneously, the cloth moved. From their hands to their shoulders in one motion, Wren drawing one side and May the other, the pale linen settling across both of them at once, the full width of it between them, the silver moon border at the edge catching the morning light. She felt the weight of it, heavier than it looked. The good linen, the careful stitching, all those hours of work contained in it, and warm, slightly, from having been on his shoulders before this moment. She did not look at him right away. She looked at the cloth itself. At the hem she could see to her right where the silver moons ran along the edge, each one stitched in the lamplight of a particular night, for a particular reason, with the particular care she brought to everything that mattered. The moon does not stop because it is not full. We see you in your dark time. We are still here. She had stitched this for a dying man she did not know. She was wearing it now, with the man he had become. The pack on the north side was quiet and fully present, and some of them had come closer than they had been standing when she arrived. Lady Avery had moved to the front. Hale was radiating something that was either joy or its close equivalent, and he was doing very little to contain it. The village side was mostly quiet. Vera was not quiet, but this was expected and right. The few others who had come were watching with the particular expression of people witnessing something they do not fully have the vocabulary for but that they understand, instinctively, matters. Elder Croft was not present. She registered this fact and let it settle into place. Some things took longer than one morning. The morning was still the morning. What Wren and May had organized between them was, it turned out, a gathering that included food and a fire, and enough space for both groups to slowly, awkwardly, with the tentative quality of 2 communities encountering each other without a map, begin to share the same ground. Nora watched this happen from where she stood, watched pack members and village people find each other, and not find each other, and find each other again. Watched Hale immediately and enthusiastically take it upon himself to introduce people who had not asked to be introduced. Watched Vera discover that Lady Avery had strong opinions about herb management, and immediately begin what appeared to be a deeply satisfying conversation about it. There was a moment in the reorganization of the two groups when it was briefly just the two of them. The cloth was still over their shoulders. He did not move to take it off. She did not either. He said, quietly, in the way he said things that mattered. I looked at you from the cot one morning, before you woke up. You were asleep over the cloth with your hand still near the needle. She said, you told me you were not awake. I was careful about it. She looked at him. What did you think? She said. He was quiet for a moment. I thought, whoever this person is, she treated my life as if it already mattered, before she knew my name, before she knew anything about what I was, or what I had done. He looked at the silver hem. I did not know what to do with that. I had not been given that before. The cold was steady around them. The two worlds on either side were finding their way through the morning, with the uncertain, exploratory quality of something new. She said, you could have told me you were awake. I know, he said. I was not ready. She said, were you ready when you came to the village the first time? No, he said. When you wrote the letter. Closer. She looked at him. When were you ready? He met her eyes steadily. When you walked up the ridge alone, he said. You could have written back to Ren. You could have sent word. You walked up in winter cold by yourself, because you had decided to. He held her gaze. That was when I was ready, because that told me you were not coming for any reason I could have manufactured or arranged. You came because you decided to. There is no way to be ready for that, except to simply be it. Around them, the two worlds were moving together. Nora looked at the silver moons along the hem of the cloth they were both wearing. She had stitched these by lamplight in the middle of the night, believing he would not survive to see the morning. She had stitched them from her mother's pattern, her mother's meaning, the meaning that the moon does not stop in its dark phase. She had not known she was stitching something she would stand inside. But perhaps that was always true of the things that turned out to matter most. You made them without knowing what they were for. You made them with care, because care was what you had, and what you had was what you put into things. And the things that received your care went out into the world and did what they were going to do. And sometimes what they did was far beyond the purpose you had in mind when you began. She adjusted the cloth more evenly across their shoulders. She looked at the ridge above them, and the frost burning off the eastern slope in the morning light, and the pale clear sky over everything. She said, quietly, so only he heard, I need you to keep being honest with me. Not selectively, not only when it is comfortable. I know, he said. I need you to understand that I am going to keep living at the far end of the village path, she said. I need the view that goes up instead of across. I know that too, he said. I came to you. She looked at him. Something settled. Not dramatically, not with the weight of a significant moment announcing itself. Simply settled, the way things settle when they have been uncertain for a long time and have finally arrived at a place that fits. The way a piece of cloth lies right when the grain is aligned and the tension is even and everything is where it belongs. She turned back to the gathering. Both worlds were having breakfast in the cold air of the ridge, which was not how either of them had expected the morning to go, and which was, she could see clearly, exactly right. The silver moons along the hem of the cloth caught the full morning light as the sun cleared the eastern ridge and came down on the boundary line, and for a moment, every stitch she had put into the burial cloth was visible and bright. All that careful lamplight work showing itself in the clear, cold light of a morning that had turned out to be something entirely other than what it was made for. The moon does not stop because it is not full. She had stitched it for a dying man. He wore it now alongside her, in the light of a morning that was new and cold and entirely their own. And somewhere on the ridge above them, the day was fully arriving, and on both sides of the invisible line, that was no longer quite so much of a line as it had been, two worlds were beginning the slow, imperfect, necessary work of becoming something that neither of them had a name for yet, but that both of them had chosen, and that the choice alone made real.